Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have such an amazing show lined up. Our first guest is Dr. John DeGarmo, and he's here today to talk to us about his new book, Faith and Foster Care. Now, Dr. John is highly educated. He has a master's degree in educational leadership and a doctorate in educational leadership as well. And when he wrote his dissertation, he did it on the needs of foster care children and what they're facing in rural schools. So he is a regular contributor to many magazines and also Huffington Post. And both him and his wife were recipients for the Good Morning America Ultimate Hero Award and with the Up With People Everyday Hero Award. So let's welcome to the show, Dr. John.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, what a joy it is to have you here. Yeah, I think a lot of times when people talk about the foster care system, or maybe they just don't have discussions about it because there's so much going on with the children in it, they're not even sure how to tackle the whole topic and the issue of it.
Right. You know, before I was a foster parent, I had many misconceptions, many false assumptions. I really didn't understand the foster care system in general. And I think that's what the general public is. I believe that the general society doesn't understand what the children go through and what the foster parents go through and what the foster care system is like in general. And much of that misconceptions is due to a lot of negative media stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know, you gave some staggering just stats in your book in regards to the number of children every year that are going through the foster care system.
Yes. You know, actually, right now, America is seeing an increase in the number of children being placed into foster care. We are back around 500,000. We had dipped to close to 400,000, but there's a rise again, and it generally is because of the increase in the opioid crisis in America.
That would make sense, because you have people, if they become addicted to opiates, obviously they probably are not going to be in the best place until they get themselves taken care of to be able to even be a good parent.
Yes. That's right. So the children are being removed from the homes because the parents are strongly addicted to the drugs. Or we also have to remember that 33,000 people died last year because of the opioid crisis. So that's leaving so many of these children parentless as well.
And orphans. So what was the turning point that made you both you and your wife, these phenomenal advocates for children in the foster care system?
Oh, you're very kind. Thanks for asking. Years ago, actually over 20 years ago now, our first child died of a condition called anencephaly, or some pronounce it anencephaly. It's a condition where the brain or the skull never truly form, and my wife was in labor for 92 hours. And afterwards, I turned my back on a lot of things. I was full with a lot of, not just grief, but a lot of anger at a lot of things. And then years later, we moved back to America. We had lived in Australia, where she is from. And we had 3 healthy children later on. And I was teaching at a high school level in a very, very rural, poor area in the state of Georgia. And I just kept noticing a lot of the students coming through my classroom had issues with poor behavior, poor attendance, poor grades. And I kept asking myself, why? What's going on? What's the correlation here? And then I met some of their birth parents, and it dawned on me that, yes, it really does start in the home. So my wife and I had discussions about how can we help these children? How can we serve these kids? We had lost our first child. How can we help other kids in need? And that led to over 50 kids through our home. That led to adopting 3 from care. That led to the doctorate and several books, and now traveling the world, training foster parents and speaking about foster care. And I really have devoted every aspect of my life to children in foster care.
Well, and I know that Faith and Foster Care is your most recent book, but you have a ton of books on this topic. And I think for people who are just either maybe they're considering becoming a foster parent, or maybe are looking for more information in regards to being a foster parent, I mean, you have so many resources for them to dive into and get a better understanding of what that all entails.
Yes, that was my intent. Again, I as I said earlier, I didn't really understand foster parenting, foster care. So I wrote some books. The book Fostering Love, One Foster Parent's Journey, is designed for those people who have no clue. I wanted to share a story of what it was really like caring for these children in the home. Didn't want to sugarcoat it at all. Full of sadness, full of humor, full of the challenges, the struggles, the joys. To show other people that, these children are not bad kids. They are victims, and they need someone to step up and say, I'll care for you. I will love you. And then other books as well, like you mentioned. Yeah, sure.
all those other books. I mean, when you go to your store on your website, the page just keeps going. So, well, and what I really like is how, and this is a big component too, is how you brought the faith part into dealing with this epidemic that we're going through. And so I want you to really expand upon that for our listeners, because I think most people, they look at it and it's like, well, not my problem. I'm a good person. I believe in God. Maybe I go to church, maybe I don't, but I'm a good person overall, but my life isn't really fulfilled. So, how does the faith play a part with all this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I hear so many people tell me this, Dr. John, I couldn't do what you do. It would hurt too much to get the kids back. And my response is this. My response is, well, that's how it's supposed to be. That's how it's supposed to be. These children need me to love them with all that I have, love them unconditionally, so that when they do leave my home, that my heart breaks. And it's like losing my own child. But if someone can't do that, if someone can't be a foster parent, everybody can help a child in the foster care system in this way. And when we have roughly 500,000 children in America's foster care system, the mission field is in our own nation. It's in our own state. It's in our own backyard. I spent 4 summers in Mexico building homes. I have children who have gone to Honduras, Nicaragua, and done that. That's wonderful. But so many people in our nation forget that there is a mission field right where we live. I really believe that God is calling us to care for his children in need in this mission field. And there are so many ways that churches and faith-based organizations and people of faith can help children in foster care without having them in their own home. So that's what that book is designed for.
To take them through that.
Right.
In your experience, what are some of the major challenges that you see children in foster care going through?
Oh my goodness, where do you start?
I can imagine,
Well, I had I'll tell you a couple of stories here. I had a 4-year-old boy come to my house, and he had cigarette burns on the roof of his mouth, his tongue, and his genitals from his mother because she wanted to hide the evidence. He was so emotionally scarred. He showed no emotion the entire time he was with us no joy, no anxiety, no sorrow, no confusion, nothing. Just so emotionally scarred. We had a 4-year-old girl who was just with us recently. She had been raped repeatedly by her grandfather, who was actually her biological father at the same time because he had been raping his daughter to produce children. And she could not speak one word, just grunted and pointed, 4 years of age. The 13-year-old boy who was deserted on the highway on his birthday from his mother. The 17-year-old girl who came to us who had 3 families in America adopt her and then use her for child sex trafficking. These are just some of the stories that the kids have faced in our home. They come with so much abuse and trauma and neglect. But what many people don't realize is this. despite all of the abuse they've suffered and neglect they suffer and the trauma, when they are placed into a foster care home, like my own, it is a frightening time for them. That is traumatic enough. Can you imagine a 7-year-old girl or a 7-year-old boy, maybe your own child or niece or whatever it may be, who is taken from everything they know late at night, maybe from their parents, their siblings, their stuffed animals, their toys, their pets, their house, their home, their friends, family members, siblings, everything they know, without any explanation, placed into a strange home with strange people, the foster parents, and told this is where you're going to be. And then what do they do at night? Well, they ask questions like, why am I here? When do I go home? When do I see mommy next? And then they cry themselves to sleep because they are terrified. It is very scary being placed in the foster care system. So that's traumatic enough as it is.
What are some of the things when you have children in your home and they're going through just this change? What are some of the things that you and your family do to help reassure them that life is going to get better?
Well, as foster parents, we have to be very, very patient with them and very compassionate. Because again, they are scared, so they may resist us. They may put up walls. They may become very angry towards us. So we're very, very patient, very compassionate. Have to give them a lot of time. We give them, as I noted earlier, as much unconditional love as we possibly can. I believe that most kids in foster care need 3 things: stability, security, and unconditional love. They need someone to love them because we might be the first person who has ever loved them in any positive way. Mm-hmm. So we do that. And in our house also, there are no labels. There's no biological, there's no foster, there's no adoptive. They're all my children, and I treat them equally the same. So those are just some of the things that we do.
Well, and so let's say someone's looking to, they've been thinking about this either as a ministry or as a calling, or just they just know in their heart that this is what they need to be doing, because, this is just, what these children are going through is just horrific. What are some of the things that they should consider before becoming a foster parent or foster family?
Well, I hope that they do begin with, with that number of kids in foster care, there are not enough foster parents. My wife and I have had up to 11 children in our house at the same time, including 7 in diapers. So when I say we go to work to rest, we really do that. So if someone is considering becoming a foster parent, the first thing they need to do is, of course, sit down with their spouse or their partner and talk about it and pray about it and decide if both are on board, if both are determined to do it. Because if one person wants to do it and the other person doesn't want to do it, it will ruin the relationship, because it's very challenging. It's very, very challenging. It's very time consuming. So both have to determine if they're both on board. And then if they have children of their own, they need to make sure the children are on board. Then they contact their local child welfare agency or their private foster care agency, and then they begin the process of becoming foster parents. But the first thing they need to do is sit down with their spouse or partner and decide if both really want to do it.
What is the longest period of time you've had a child that your family has fostered?
2 years. 2 years. A girl who was age 7 came to us, and she was with us for almost 2 years. Actually, we tried to adopt her, but she went to live with her aunt and uncle in a different state right before Christmas one year. And sadly, their stepson raped her repeatedly, and then they abandoned her in a different state. It's a tragic. She's now actually 20 years of age and has now passed the 9th grade and has spent several years in a children's mental health hospital. It's very, very tragic. But 2 years, the average child stays in foster care for 22 to 26 months. Now, I have seen some kids who have been in foster care. Actually, I spoke to someone just earlier today from age 6 to age 18 until they aged out of the system. And they just bounced from home to home to home. And that's very, very traumatic, as you can imagine.
Oh, my goodness. It would be, it'd just be heartbreaking, especially for children having to be uprooted. They get used to a family, just how things are going, and then to be uprooted and moved. that's kind of difficult. Now, are there reasons why children would be uprooted like that and moved? Maybe like the birth parents are coming back into the scene, or what are some of the reasons that that would happen?
Sure, great question. So 50% of children in foster care are reunited with their birth parents or biological family members. It's called reunification, and that's the end goal of foster care is to have that reunification. And many times is a happy ending. Sadly, 50% of that end up back in foster care again. Their parents are truly not prepared or ready to take care of their children. So they come back into care. Sometimes a foster family may say, you know what, they may be illness in the family. They're no longer able to care for the child. Perhaps the foster parents are moving from one city or one state to another. Perhaps they have just aged and they can no longer do it. Maybe the child's birth parents have moved and the foster child needs to be moved closer to them. Perhaps a foster child has so many traumatic issues that the foster parent simply does not have the resources to care for that child. So there's a number of reasons why, really.
And why that would happen.
Right.
Now, I can imagine that you have, these amazing children in your home, and then there comes the day where you have to, say goodbye to them because this is a temporary situation. It's meant to be a temporary unless you go through the adoption process. Right. And I was really, I was just amazed at the stats of how many children end up being available for adoption through all this as well.
Right.
I think it was I think you had quoted something like 125,000 children.
Correct. That's right.
Yeah. So,
yes.
I mean, so we're going through this process and the children are getting ready to leave. I'm sure the foster parents go through grief and loss, right?
Oh my goodness. That is one of the biggest reasons why foster parents quit being foster parents. That your average foster parent lasts for about a year and a half, and then they stop doing it because the grief is so very strong. And most people don't understand that. It really is like losing your own child because you've given that child as much love as you possibly can. So when they leave, it breaks your heart. My wife, she knows she cannot take me to any movie that has the name Nicholas Sparks attached to it because I'm such an emotional cripple now. I will just cry at the drop of a hat. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. But at the same time, that's a good sign because it means that you gave the child what the child needed. You gave that child your heart.
Well, what are some ways that foster parents can kind of let go when that happens? And it's not to protect their heart because, obviously they're doing the right things when you feel these emotions. But what are some ways that they can kind of prepare for that?
Well, every foster parent, I believe, needs to be in a foster parent support group of some kind. Most communities, most counties or towns have a foster parent support group because nobody understands a foster parent like another foster parent. They can support each other and they can grieve with each other, et cetera, et cetera. So that's very important. And when you have grief, there are 6 stages of loss. There's 6 stages of grief that Kubler-Ross explained. So you need to recognize that you will have shock, you will have depression, you will have anger. To recognize those things and, healthy diets, support groups, journaling. There's a whole number of ways you can help yourself. Again, it's like losing your child. So you have to take steps in the grieving process to heal.
I could imagine because, I'm sure that each child that comes into your home, they bring such a special gift and it's easy to just love them and become attached to them.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We've adopted 3 from the foster care system. At the same time, we've had 4 failed adoptions. So my wife and I have a heart like most foster parents. It's like a quilt. Our heart has different patches all over it.
I like that analogy. Because there's never just your heart's only so big. You can continuously add to the quilt that you have. Right. Well, and so when, so I kind of want to talk about this a little bit. So if the birth parents come back into the picture, and ultimately the option is, the hope is to reunite the children with the birth parents. But let's say that they come back into the picture and they're less than stellar examples of parenting, maybe because of they're in addiction or just what they have going on at the moment. How does that all play out? How do you interact as the foster family? How do you interact with the birth parents, or do you?
Well, you do, and you do sometimes, and that can be challenging at times. What most don't realize is this: the child doesn't want to be in my home when they're first placed there. They can suffer all that abuse and neglect and abandonment, but at the end of the day, that's their norm. That's their mommy and their daddy, and they always want to be with their mommy and their daddy because it's their mommy and daddy. So they want to go with them. So when we meet with birth parents, and there's something called co-parenting, helping the birth parent to be a better parent. Two of the three that I've adopted are third generation foster care, which means their birth parents and their grandparents were also in foster care, and the system failed them. So as foster parents, my wife and I try to help the birth parents become better parents, because if the children don't go back to them, they may have other children. So we need to prepare them for that. So we just have to make sure that there are no, we don't judge them in any way, that we're very, very patient with them, that we show kindness towards them, that we answer their questions as honestly and openly as we can, that we help them in any way. We send them pictures that children may have drawn in school or their report cards. We may send them, we may invite them to events at the school that they're attending, things like that. But sure, it can be challenging because many birth parents judge the foster parents as the bad guy. They see us as the person that took their child away.
Well, that kind of leaves everyone in an interesting position because of that misperception, because you're really there providing a home and unconditional love where they can go ahead and at least move through this difficult time that they're going through.
Yes, that's absolutely right. We're here to help the child and the parent and have the reunification. But there are some people, though, that they don't want to recognize the poor choices they have made. They don't want to recognize that they may be at fault. So they place the blame upon other people, and they place the blame upon the foster parents or the child welfare agency or both.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's always easier to blame somebody else, right?
Yes, right.
Well, and so what happens, I just want to touch on this too. So what happens when a child, reaches the age of 18 and they're in foster care? Where do they go from there?
Oh, it's pretty tragic. It's called aging out. Some states it's 18 years of age. Other states it may be 21 years of age. But the statistics are grim. So imagine a child who is 18 years of age, and all of a sudden they are on their own completely. There is nobody to call upon when they have a flat tire on a rainy, rainy night. There's no one who's going to invite them over for Christmas or Thanksgiving. No one they can call when they're sick or help them fill out a job application. Nobody to sing happy birthday to them. So many of these kids end up, it's not good. 55% will drop out of school. 65% will end up homeless. 75% will end up in jail. And the system so the cycle will repeat itself for the next generation.
And it's easy to see why there would be that kind of cycle, because how can we expect people 18 years of age all of a sudden, because they're still, young adults, having to take on the full responsibilities of an adult.
On top of that, many of these children are at least a year and a half behind in school. So school has failed them in every way. They wish to leave school. They don't want to be labeled a foster child anymore. They have suffered from massive trauma, massive abuse. They have issues of trust. They have issues of attachment. So there's no way in the world they're going to be able to succeed or thrive without any type.
Is there any kind of like housing or anything that's offered for them when they reach that age?
Yes. So in many states they can sign on to continue to remain in foster care, until they're 21 years of age or maybe even older. If they should go to college, and sadly only 6% will go to college, there's a program that allows them free college and free housing and room. And there are programs around the country that are designed to help children in foster care if they want. Again, many of them simply say, I don't want to be in foster care anymore, and they strike out on their own. And you saw the statistics. They're pretty grim.
Those are very grim statistics. Well, thank goodness we've got people like you in the world that are shedding light on this and then really kind of calling people to arms within their community, within their churches, to look at this as a way of really being either giving back or being in ministry.
Yeah, thank you. So again, there are so many ways faith-based groups and churches can help children in foster care without caring for them in their home. They can be mentors. They can have suitcase or clothing drive for the children. They can provide school supplies. They can drive them to doctor's appointments. They can teach them important cooking skills or social skills or living skills. There's so many ways churches can help these children. And when they help the children, they also help the birth parents and the foster parents at the same time.
Now, I have to ask you, let's say, the church I go to, they don't have anything in place where people would talk, even have, start the conversation in regards to foster care ministry. Do you travel around and speak on this topic? Do people hire you for consulting to establish this within their church, within their organization?
Absolutely. The last 2 months I've been in Greece. Speaking in Greece, I traveled from California to Alaska to Florida to Texas to Michigan and all in between. I speak at many, many churches on a Sunday morning. I consult for a lot of churches who say, hey, you know what? We don't know how to do it, but we want to have our own foster care ministry. We want to have it as a form of outreach. How do we do that? So I work with them and show them how to do it. Yes. And to answer your question, yes to all the above.
Yes, to all the above. Because I could imagine that while we are focused on this epidemic here in the U.S., that this is a worldwide epidemic.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. And you know what we've not touched on is a number of children in foster care fall victim to one of the largest businesses in the world, and that is child sex trafficking. It is a huge issue, not only globally, but here in America. It is a global issue, that is for sure.
Okay, so you open that box, so we're going to talk about it a little bit. So what happens is that I'm taking a stab at this, so please correct me if I'm wrong, that people will become foster parents and traffic children, or how does that all play into the child sex trafficking?
No, many, many children in the foster care system run away, and they run away to a promise or a lure of something better. So many kids in foster care want one thing, and that is for someone to love them. So they go online. They go online on social media or whatever it may be, and they're reaching out for someone to love them. And that's where the sexual predators and child sex traffickers are waiting for them and then lure them in with false promises and false hopes. And these children run away, or they have already left the foster care system. They've aged out, or they're no longer a foster child, and they end up child sex trafficking victims as well. They're very, very vulnerable. They just want to believe that somebody cares for them. And these predators, these traffickers, know that. So they quickly and easily lure them in.
We'll prey on that. Well, yeah. I'm so glad that not only that you wrote the book, but that you and your family are bringing this to light, this topic more to light, because I don't think there's enough discussion on this. I think most people, there's like foster care, they're being taken care of without really thinking about what happens when they turn 18. They have to move around. They may have to move around a lot. There's an adjustment period. There are a lot of things to consider, but it's got to be one of the most rewarding things as well.
Of all the children that have come through my home, and it's 50 plus children, every child has made me a better person in some way. I am far better parent, better spouse, better husband, better member of my community because of being a foster parent. Is it tough? Oh, yeah. Hardest thing I've done. Most rewarding thing I've done at the same time.
Well, and you just keep adding to your family, which is, more love is the way to go for sure.
Yes, that's right.
Well, so Dr. John, where can people connect with you and not only learn about your multiple books? We've been talking about faith and foster care, but where can people connect with you and be part of your community and get involved?
Oh, thanks for asking. So if you just Google the Foster Care Institute or Dr. John DeGarmo Foster Care, my website will come up. Of course, I'm on social media, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Google+, Dr. John DeGarmo Foster Care. It'll all come up. And there's so much more information, not just for foster parents, but for anybody who is interested in caring for children in need, as well as issues of child sex trafficking and child welfare related issues as well. So they'll find all of it at my website and social media.
Your website is really filled with some great information. And again, you don't have to become a foster parent to support foster children. There are many things you can do within your community to kind of help them, either driving them like you were saying, or school, doing supplies, getting supplies for school, kind of a fundraiser for that. Lots of different ways to get involved. Dr. John, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today. Gosh, we really appreciate it.
Oh, no, the pleasure is mine. I appreciate the opportunity, and I really appreciate your interest and your advocacy in this.
Oh, well, thank you. We are going to pause here for a quick break, and we will be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Ben Wexler is a gifted leadership development and strategy consultant for professionals who want to transform their organizations and careers. Through a uniquely personalized set of processes, participants discover their unique knowledge, how to leverage that knowledge and experience, and then put it all together with a global strategy. You're more valuable, your organization is more valuable, and the change is viral. Contact Ben at 630-881-1074. 630-881-1074.
This is Jennifer McGill. My highly anticipated new album, Unbreakable, is now available at jennifermcgill.com. Everything from power ballads to high-energy jam-out-in-your-car songs. I used my highest joys and deepest pains to create empowering songs of love, strength, healing, and restoration so that you can be unbreakable too. Get your copy of Unbreakable today from jennifermcgill.com. Because who doesn't want to be unbreakable?
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. I am so delighted we're spending this time here. Our next guest, Daniel Ryan Day, is here today to talk to us about his brand new book, Intentional Christian: What to Do When You Don't Know What to Do. So let's welcome to the show, Daniel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, what a joy it is to have you here, Daniel. And your book, wow, I just love the back of how you explain kind of some of the purpose of this book. It's like Moses got a burning bush. Noah was told to build an ark. Wouldn't it be nice if your calling was just as obvious? Where did you come up with this messaging and the inspiration to write this book?
Yeah, well, it starts with my own story of that's what I desired. I wanted God to show up in my life in a very real way and tell me what he wanted me to do with my life, what the job was that he had designed me for, why he put me on this, place called Earth, and what role he had for me to play. And I had a hard time finding that, and I struggled with that for many years, trying to figure out the answer to the question, what am I supposed to do with my life, or what is God's calling for my life? And so the message of the book really begins with my own struggle and journey with God of trying to figure out what he had for me to do.
Well, and was there like a specific thing that happened that was kind of like, okay, I just feel like I'm not getting the messages. I'm not getting any direction or inspiration. Was it in regards to maybe like a career choice, or just life didn't feel like there was, sometimes it feels like there's that emptiness when we don't really feel like we have that kind of direction?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, for me, the specific thing that happened was I grew up in a Christian family and in church, a Christian school, and I grew up hearing a lot about the call of God and that God had kind of a unique plan for each person. And a lot of times when I would hear the verse Jeremiah 29:11, which basically says that God has a plan and a hope and a future for us, that they would make that very personal and say that God had a plan for me. And specifically, I remember being 17 years old and already starting to struggle with the question of, okay, if God has something for me to do, then he probably should tell me which college to go to and what to major in and stuff like that. So my church actually hosted a calling class where we would, sit down and the staff of the church would teach us what it looks like to be called by God to a specific job. And so I attended the class, and I remember walking into the old youth room, which is where the class was held, and I'd kind of forgotten how cold that room was. It had white tile and white walls, and kind of felt sanitized and kind of smelled sanitized too, I guess. But the church had been growing, and they had built this really nice new youth wing, and which was a lot warmer, but with pool tables and stuff like that. And so this room had just been kind of sitting there. And they had to host it in this particular room, however, because I found out pretty quickly I wasn't the only one struggling to figure this out. In fact, the old youth room was packed with people, and not just teenagers, but young adults and some adults in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who were struggling to figure out what God had for them. And so as the calling class began and went on, they started to kind of describe two groups of people: the group of people that were called to ministry, full-time ministry, whether that was as a pastor or missionary or something like that. And I don't know if the church intended this or not, but it kind of sounded like that group was the A team. They were the people specifically, they were the ones that God was really excited about because they were going to make a big difference in the world. And then there was everybody else, all the people that were called to be Christians, but maybe they live that out in the business world or something like that. And so because of that class, I really wanted to be part of that A team, to get that specific call by God to do something like Moses or Noah. But I got to the end of the class and I didn't get a calling, and they were handing out certificates to all the called. So I went ahead and raised my hand and went forward anyway, because I figured, well, my calling's probably just on the way and I haven't found it yet. But a year later, I didn't get accepted into the college that I wanted to go to. And so I had to go to a different college. And then over the next 4 years, I really struggled to figure out what to major in. I bounced between different majors, and which a lot of college students do, is they try to figure that out. And I started to feel all this pressure to figure out the rest of my life, between the ages of 18 and 22. And And then I graduated college and ended up in a job that didn't work out, and then bounced to another job and then another job. And at that point, I joined a ministry because I figured, well, that's where the answer is in the ministry world. But then that job didn't work out. And so I just began to really struggle with, God, I don't understand why, if you have this calling for me, why haven't you shared it with me yet? If you really love me, if you really want what's best for me, then, it makes sense that you would have created me for something. And what is that? And I ended up getting to a point where I was so frustrated that God wouldn't tell me his will that I Googled it. I Googled what is God's will for my life. And I ended up on a web page that had a series of verses, and I almost gave up before I even started because I kind of felt like I was back in that calling class. Here was going to be a bunch of verses that said God should have a plan, but I wasn't going to actually hear from God. But I saw a verse that really changed my perspective, and it was in 1 Thessalonians, and it was chapters 4 and 5. But 1 Thessalonians 4:3 says, "For this is the will of God, your sanctification." And I remember stopping and going, wait a second, there's a verse that says God's will for me? And then later in that same book, 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18, it says, "Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you," for me. And then in 1 Peter, it talks about, "For this is the will of God to do good." And so I just had this moment of, wait a second, maybe I've been searching so hard for God's specific call for my life that I've missed his will. And so that was the journey that began, which ended up leading to the book itself. But it really began in that calling class and kind of, the story that unfolded as a result.
I think a lot of young adults and teenagers feel a great deal of stress having to determine what it is that they're going to do with the rest of their life. And, I like how you've taken the Christian approach to, trying to, just determine what it is that you're supposed to do and your really kind of your place in the world and what God has in store for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I work at a family entertainment center right now, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's all the fun stuff: go-karts, laser tag, bumper cars, arcade, all that kind of stuff. And so I currently manage a business where we have a lot of people in transition that work for us. So a lot of young adults, some people who know what God has for them, or they know what their dream job is, because there's a lot of people that work for us that are not believers. But there's also a bunch of people that work for us and they have no idea what they're supposed to do next. They have no idea what the right job is for them. And what I have found is that so many people are struggling to figure that out. They're struggling to figure out what their dream job is. Some of them don't even know. They don't even know what to look for. And as a result of that frustration, it ends up almost compounding on itself, where they feel all this pressure to figure it out. And then the more they can't figure it out, the more pressure they feel. And I work with several that I can think of just off the top of my head. I won't name names, but that are in that place of almost discouragement and depression, and they just can't figure out what's next and what they're supposed to do. And so, yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of pressure, especially on young adults, but as people get older and they still can't figure it out, they feel that pressure building even more to try to figure out what they're supposed to do.
Well, and I get it, because it's like, okay, if I choose something, will I ever be able? I think there's some finality in it. It's like, okay, if I choose this, and that's it. I look back on my life when I first got into college. It was to do nursing. Mm-hmm. And during that stint, I kind of look back and it's like, blood makes me pass out, so I'm probably not a good person for that. And they're like, oh, you'll get used to it. But, later on in my career, I pivoted. I made some changes and choices and kind of moved from there into, something that really fulfills my heart. So sometimes I think that that's a journey, as opposed to, having so much stress on yourself to try to, let's figure it all out now,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. But man, when you're in the middle of trying to figure it out, you feel like you're supposed to figure it all out.
Oh yeah.
I remember just choosing a major and how I've literally felt like I was figuring out everything, that I had to put all the pros and cons for the rest of my life on paper because whatever decision I made was going to be final. But you're absolutely right. As I look back over my own experience, I've held a couple marketing positions, but I've also been an author, and I've also done some radio stuff. I've been a broadcast producer for a radio program. A lot of these things are things that I don't even know how I ended up there and doing that. But it's a journey. I was just talking with somebody the other day, and they had just finished a new CD, and it was an older gentleman that's been around the country scene for a long time. And he was talking through his journey of, driving trucks and other stuff that he's done in his life that helped, pay the bills, a lot of which he did not choose or try to figure out at one point. And, sometimes that's where we're at, where paying a bill or something like that becomes more important than figuring out our dream, and we just have to do something. And there's, I think, one of the sad things that we see when people are struggling with trying to find a dream job is they forget how good it is just that they have a job too sometimes. Yeah. And what a blessing that is. It's okay to look for something else. It's okay to want to try to plan our way. But ultimately, I believe that God directs our steps. But ultimately, at the same time, we can also have a lot of pride just in the fact that we get the opportunity to provide for our families. We should be very proud of the fact that we're doing that, even if our jobs aren't as exciting maybe as we want them to be.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I look back at my eclectic background, and it brings a very unique and diverse set of, just not skill set, but understanding. So, it's kind of interesting where our path will take us. And so I've got to ask you, so when you were going through this, and I know you also kind of work with other people, what would be some advice you would give somebody that says, you know what, I just don't feel like God is even hearing my questions, or my, I just feel like I'm not getting any feedback. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, well, first I would just tell them that I have been there and I'm still there sometimes. One of the hardest things about writing a book like this is I still struggle with all the things that are in the book. I haven't somehow graduated to mastering that. And so, a few years ago, I was really struggling with God. I was frustrated with him because he wouldn't tell me what he wanted me to do. I kind of felt like we were in this worldwide game of hide and seek, and God had hid his will for my life really, really well, and I couldn't find it, and it didn't make sense to me. And so what I started to realize, though, was there's a lot of songs out there and teaching about God being a good father. And as I began to think about that, I was like, okay, what would that mean? Does it make sense that a good father would hide something as important as his will for our lives? And so as I thought about that more, I started to think about the relationship I had with my own dad. And I know not everyone is blessed with a good relationship with their dad, but I definitely have a good one. And as I grew up, my dad was very vocal and clear about what his expectations for me were. But his expectations had very little to do with what I did for a living as far as a job, and they had a lot more to do with my character. Mm-hmm. He expected me to honor my mother. And when I didn't honor my mother, which, of course, I never did, but I hear there's some kids that might not honor their mothers sometimes. Just kidding, of course. He would discipline me to shape and mold my character back to what his expectations were. He expected me to honor others, to honor women, to protect the weak, to do well in school. And he was very vocal and clear about that. But then when it came to, okay, Dad, what job should I do? Or should I join the family business because my family has a set of businesses? Or what specific job should I take? He was very slow. He wouldn't tell me exactly what he thought I should do. He would ask good questions. He'd kind of shape my search, but he wanted me to figure that out because he didn't want to speak that into my life. He felt like that was important for me to discover through asking good questions. Mm-hmm. And so as I started to think of that in relation to God, what if God acts in a similar way? What if he does kind of similar things? And so that fits really well with some of the verses that I discovered where it says, this is the will of God for you, to rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances. We can do those things in any job. It's not about a specific job. But those are the expectations of character that God has for those who follow him. And so my encouragement to someone who's out there and they're like, man, God is not speaking to me, is I think God may have already spoken to you. There's some verses in Scripture that describe what God expects of us. Think about in Micah, it says that what does God require of us but to seek justice, to love mercy, to walk humbly with God. There's a lot of injustice in our world, in our jobs. We see that especially in situations like what we've seen over the past few months. There's a lot of injustice in the world. And it doesn't matter what job we're in, but we have opportunities every day to fight injustice or to seek justice. And so what I would hope that those people would hear is that God loves them, he cares for them, and he has spoken to them. But it has a lot more to do with walking with him and abiding in relationship with him than it necessarily does about this particular job or that particular job. Well,
and correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I think a lot of times God wants us to also, as you were talking about, like kind of discover the answers for ourselves. He doesn't want to totally tell us what to do. He wants us to kind of go through that process of discovery and be able to do that. I mean, while he has guided some of the prophets, like Moses and Noah, he's also tested them as well. It's like, hey, get out there and kind of figure some of this out yourself, but you still carry that faith with you.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I talk about a little bit in the book is about specific calling, because obviously people that have any exposure to the Bible know that there's people in the Bible that God showed up and said, hey, I have something for you to do. But one of the things that I've realized in this process is that it's actually really rare for those people to get a specific job from God. And what I mean by that is Noah's a great example. Because in Genesis, it actually tells us what Noah did for the first really big part of his life. And the Bible says it's 500 years. The first 500 years of Noah's life, he was a righteous man who walked with God. That's the big story of his life. Then for a very small part of his life, as far as time goes, God calls him to build a boat. And so we focus so much on Noah's boat building days, but Noah wouldn't have gotten there if he didn't have this whole history of walking throughout the majority of his life in righteousness and humbly with God. And so one of the things that's interesting is as we look through the scriptures, I mean, even some of the prophets, there was one of them was a farmer who farmed figs. And as we look through the Bible, we find shepherds that God uses. And others, it's actually rare for God's specific calling even to be about a specific job. A lot of times it has much more with a specific way of living, or Abraham was called to live in a certain place, but not necessarily to do certain things. And so even that has somewhat changed my perspective as well, that a lot of times it's not about a job. But my favorite verse about all this is Proverbs 16:9, which is, a man or woman plans his or her way, but God directs his or her steps. And what I love about that is it's okay for us to plan our way. It's okay for us to take strengths tests and try to figure out what the best job is for us that fits our gifts and our abilities and the opportunities that we have. But ultimately, it is God who directs our steps, even if he doesn't necessarily tell us, this is what I want you to do.
Daniel, throughout this entire process and in writing your book, Intentional Christian, what were some of the surprising things that you came across?
Yeah, the first one is the one I just mentioned, specific calling. I really thought once I started to dig into some of these people that I was going to find this specific call to a specific job that went throughout their whole life. And I found that to be very rare in the Bible. The second thing that was really surprising to me is when it comes to a specific call from God, every single example we have in the Bible, God is super clear. Like there is no doubt that God shows up. In fact, he's so clear for a few people that, like Moses, for example, that he shows up in a bush that's burning but doesn't burn. And then he speaks out of a bush. I mean, I think all of us, if we saw a bush that was on fire but it wasn't burning and then it started talking to us, we'd be like, just like Moses, well, let me go over and see this strange sight, which is how the Bible describes it. And so, I mean, in that situation, God made it very clear, Moses, this is what I want you to do. Same thing with Jonah, same thing with a few, with others, an angel shows up or whatever. So it was very, very clear when there was a specific calling from God. And then the other thing that was really surprising is a lot of people that were called by God wanted absolutely nothing to do with what God called them to do.
I remember that most of them are kind of like, are you sure this message is for me? Just about.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and Jonah, of course, is one of my favorites because, I mean, he decides, okay, not only am I not going to do what God's called me to do, but I'm going to buy a ticket and get on a boat and sail to the furthest side of the known world away from my calling. And so that's what he does. And Moses, I mean, again, what a great example for us of someone that God called him. He turns around and goes, no, thank you, God. I don't want to do that. And then he comes up with every excuse. I mean, when I read through the excuses that Moses gives, I so identify with so many of them. God, I'm not good at that. One of the things that we always hear when it comes to jobs is that God, if he's going to call us to something, it's going to be, God's going to call you to something that you're good at. He's given you strengths and abilities that he's going to use. But with Moses, that's not true. Moses says, God, you're calling me to do something I'm not good at. And God says, it's okay. I'll take care of it. I want you to do it anyway. And so that was super surprising too. But then even at the end, Moses still looks at God and goes, no, God, please go choose someone else. And God says, no, you're going to do this. And so God makes his call is very clear. And then he doesn't let the person get out of it, even if they want to. So those were some of the really surprising things. And one other one I would throw out there is I've always heard all my life that God will never give you more than you can handle. People always throw that phrase out to me, especially when I'm going through tough times. Moses was given more than he could handle, but it's because God was with him that he was able to handle it. And so that was another one of those things that was very surprising as I thought through what specific calling in the Bible looks like.
Well, it's very interesting when you look back in the Bible and the journey that, Moses and Noah and others have taken, how much there's that kind of back and forth with them and God in regards to their path and their journey. Now, I know in your book you also talk about living intentionally. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so as I started to explore, there's these two groups of callings basically that I saw in the Bible. The first ones that I mentioned earlier were, for this is the will of God, your sanctification, or to rejoice always, pray without ceasing, or to seek justice, love mercy. So we have these callings, and in the book I call them common callings, not common because they show up. For example, one of the common callings is to love our enemies. It's really rare to find somebody that loves their enemy. But God has called us to that. So I call them common because they apply to all people. So those common callings, though, are things that often do not come naturally to us. For example, rejoicing always. When we're in a tough situation, we get a bad diagnosis for someone in our family, or we lose a job, or we have a boss that's being super difficult, or whatever, it's tough for us to rejoice always. That doesn't come naturally to us. And so what is the difference between someone who is able to do that and someone who doesn't? And what I have found is that it really comes down to one group. The people that live it out are often those who follow through on their good intentions. And here's what I mean by that. If you asked a bunch of Christians in a room, or just a bunch of people in general, who would like to be able to rejoice always, even in the worst situations? Everybody in the room is going to raise their hand. But how many of them would actually do it? Well, it would only be the group of people that actually followed through on the good intention of, I'm going to be one of those people that rejoices always. And so when they end up in a dark situation, even though they don't feel like thanking God for the situation or what's going on in their life, they do it anyway. They have the discipline to be like, you know what? I am going to take a piece of paper out right now, and I'm going to write down everything that I'm thankful for, because right now I don't feel thankful. And so that's what I mean by intentional Christian or intentional living. The difference between those who are able to live in God's will, to make a difference in the world, are those people that don't just see someone that needs help and want to help them, but they actually follow through on that good intention and do it. They're intentional about it.
And what a great place to be in, where you really, I think it would be tough for most people to say, gosh, I want to feel that way all the time, because, life happens,
Yeah, absolutely.
It's easy to get thrown off into the bushes, but to be able to be in a place where outside circumstances really don't determine our inner moods and feelings, I think is a big deal.
Absolutely. And that's why earlier in our interview, I talked about how writing a book like this, you put it on paper, but living it out is so much harder, because it's so easy to say, okay, I'm going to rejoice. I'm going to give thanks in every circumstance. I'm going to do it. And then I get in a situation that's really tough, and I get mopey and discouraged, and I treat people around me unfairly because I'm discouraged. And I end up falling into those the same traps. And but praise God that He walks with us and can help us do some of these things outside of our own ability. But man, it's amazing the difference that it can make. Just one super quick story about that, actually.
Yes, please.
I was in between jobs at one point, and we were on a super tight budget. Luckily, we had some savings set aside. And so I was in between jobs trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next, and things just were not working out. And I remember sitting on my recliner and being really discouraged and depressed because I didn't have the money. It was to buy something silly. I think it was a Snickers bar. I think I just wanted a candy bar. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to go get a Snickers bar. And then my wife and I talked and was like, no, we don't have the money for that right now. And I was so frustrated because I didn't have the money for a Snickers bar. And I felt God lead me to, Daniel, I want you to do something for me. I want you to get up, walk to the front of the house, and I want you to walk through your entire house and thank me for everything that you see. And so it was one of those nights, whatever, I'll do it. And so I got up front and I just started at the front door. I'm like, thank you, God, for a front door that I can lock and keep people that I don't want to come into my house out of my house. Thank you that I have windows where I can look outside when it's cold or rainy without being cold or rainy. Thank you that I have blinds that I can close the windows so that at nighttime people aren't looking in. And thank you for the couch that I have and the recliner and the table and the lamp on the table. And our television and all the DVDs and the books that are on the bookshelves next to the television and our table to eat at. And, I got into the kitchen and started thanking God for the food that we did have in the fridge and for all of the utensils that we have to eat our food with and the decorations that we have to look at while we're eating our food. And I went through the bedroom and thanked God for a bed. So many people in the world don't even have a bed. Thanking God for the bed. Thank you, God, for the climate-controlled atmosphere, for running water. People walk miles for water in other countries. And then I got to a closet and I opened the door, and we had already lived in this house for like 2 years. and there were all these unopened boxes still in the closet. And I remember thinking to myself, if I have unopened boxes of stuff, I am not poor. And so I thank God for all the things that were in the boxes. I didn't even know what they were. And, that is one of those situations where by going through the habit or the discipline of saying thank you, even though I did not feel thankful, by going through that, it completely changed my perspective and completely changed the whole night. And so whether somebody's a Christian or not a Christian, being thankful, it's amazing how that can completely change our perspective, even in a situation like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my life or what job I'm supposed to have.
And there's so much to be thankful for. I mean, I love the example you give about running water. I mean, it just, there's so much to be thankful for. I mean, a lot of times we take so much for granted without really thinking about all the things that we could, thank God for that's in our lives. And, we're a lot of times we're richer than we give ourselves credit for.
Yeah, absolutely. I've often heard that there's a difference between being poor and being broke. A lot of us can be broke, meaning we don't have money, but that poor is a state of mind. And the truth is that the amount of stuff you have or the money in your bank account doesn't determine if you're poor or not. That's a state of mind. And the truth is when we look around us and we see all that we have and all that we've been blessed with, there truly is so much to be thankful for.
Oh, I would agree with you, Daniel. And so, Daniel, where can people connect with you to be part of your community and also purchase your book, Intentional Christian?
Yeah, the best place to connect with me is through the website, intentionalchristianity.com. That's intentionalchristianity.com. Also, I have a Facebook page if they'd rather connect that way. It's at Daniel Ryan Day or on Twitter as well. You can get the book on my website, intentionalchristianity.com, or through Amazon. I also travel and speak to schools and churches and things like that too. So that's the best place to connect there as well. We also have a weekly blog articles that go up and stuff like that. So however we can be of help, those are the best places for people to connect.
Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us today. I really appreciate you spending this time with us.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.